Okay. Just wait until the thing is out. So today I'm going to share with you some guidelines when you're producing seeds on increasing your seeds from your seed collection. So producing native seeds is a challenge because they're different from like your typical agronomic crops because they have a broad genetic base and they are also adaptable to a wide range of conditions. So as you can see on that image here, agronomic seed crop traits, they possess no dormancy, they have uniform germination, they're fast growing, they have uniform flowering, high seed retention, uniform seed maturity. Whereas if you have native plants, oftentimes you have high seed dormancy, your germination is staggered, so they're not uniform, they're slow growing, they have indeterminate flowering, they have variable seed maturity, and they shatter upon ripening. So the challenge, so we talked about genetics also in the first session. So the main challenge for native seed production is to try to maintain that genetic diversity or reduce the loss of that genetic diversity during seed production. So in order to maintain genetic diversity, you may require to change some production aspects. So successful production of native seeds requires creativity, adaptability, and sometimes the willingness to step away from large-scale production. So I know some of the speakers have talked about this one in the early session. So there are just 3 guidelines in terms of collecting seeds from the wild. So try to identify sources of seeds that you need for your restoration site. So they should have the same environmental characteristics. Because if you have that same, if you have collected seeds from that site with the same environmental characteristics, then they're likely to persist over time. Another guideline would be to collect from sites with large populations. So larger populations will have greater diversity compared to smaller populations, but that depends on what species you're working on. And also leave no genetic stone unturned. You want to collect strategically so you get good representation of your genetics of your population. So once you have a collection of seeds for increase, the next thing to do is to prep the site. So primary consideration is to look at weeds that are present in the site and also water, because without water you won't be killing the weeds, you won't be producing as much seed. So you want to reduce the weed seed bank first in order to have because in the future you'll have weed problems if you don't solve that. So clear the site of trash and debris, and then irrigate the site to promote weed growth. So you want to do repeated flushing and killing of the weeds with herbicides about 3 to 6 months before planting. So that way you're exhausting your weed seed bank. You won't have as much weed problems if you don't do this. While you're killing and flushing your site off of weeds, you can prepare your plant material. So try to diversify seed germination conditions in order to avoid the loss of genetic diversity. You may want to employ dormancy breaking treatments because some seeds may have deeper dormancy than others, and you want those seeds to germinate because you don't want to lose that. Make sure that you get the early and the late germinating plants in your your production block. And then an important thing is to sow things separately, so populations separately, so that you don't have any mixing going on. So once you have your plants ready, then it's time to plant and cultivate. So when you're growing these plants, try to modify the growing conditions in order to maximize the survival of all of your individuals. Some individuals may be easier to grow than others because some may be slow growing, some may be slow to establish or flower. So you just want all of your, I guess, the seeds that you're germinated, you want them to all survive. And also, when you do your seed production area or plot, time of planting ideally would be when you're at the onset of the rainy season rather than the dry season, because that way you're saving on water. Then you have these choices, so bare ground or weed cloth. That depends on weed pressure. So if you have high weed pressure, then I would recommend having weed cloth on your plantings. If not, then you can do bare ground. The question of using weed cloth or bare ground can also be about the method of harvesting. Are you going to cut your material and vacuum it on the surface, or are you just going to pick it up from the tree? Also, irrigation, things to think about. If you're doing sprinkler or drip irrigation, looking at fertilizer regimes, and also spacing. So if you're doing seed production, I would recommend doing a wide spacing, so that way all of your individuals won't compete with each other, and you get stronger plants and more seeds after that. And also easy to maintain in terms of pests and diseases. Try to minimize unintended hybridization. So you can do this by isolating populations. Like if you're increasing same species, maybe try to separate them spatially, or you can grow them at different times, so there's no chance of mixing. So if you have any pests and diseases, just make sure that you have control measures to manage them. If pollinators are present, maybe your species is wind pollinated, so take that into account. If there's any insects that would pollinate your plant, take that into account as well. If the pollinator is dead or it's non-existent, then maybe do hand pollination. Also, some environmental factors to consider. You have day length and temperature for seed development. Another note on cultivation is to avoid the domestication syndrome. So domestication syndrome is if your plant or if your seed production area has been, or if your plants have been there for a long time, they can actually adapt or change their traits over time, and that can be bad in terms of restoration. So try to limit the number of generations wherein you're exposing your plants to cultivated conditions. So you may want to replant your site or your production site with new or wild collected material every X number of years. This depends on your species. If your mortality is high during cultivation, then I would suggest to replant the whole thing and start over. And then also make sure that clonal growth or self-growing, self-sowing does not obscure plant mortality. So this is just a picture of bare ground seed production with peely grass. So weeds were kind of manageable, so we're just doing herbicide application there. This is for Mau Aki-Aki, so this is sprinkler irrigation, and then you have weed cloth on top of it. So once they set seed, then you can just cut it and then vacuum. So once your plants have set seed, and then it's time to harvest. So in order to capture the genetics to maximize the genetics of your seed lot, try to vary your timing of harvesting. So harvest at peak maturity, but if it's possible to harvest multiple times, I would recommend that, because there are early flowering and late flowering plants. So try to capture as much of those. Modify the harvest technique with each population, and seed size and shape will determine the tools to maximize diverse seeds. You can harvest either by hand if it's a small scale or operation. You can do a combine or thresher if it's a large scale operation. You can do the cut and vacuum technique, but try to calibrate your equipment every time you do the harvest, so you're not wasting seeds. So try to get as much seeds as you can during the harvest. So this is just a GIF of what they do at the NRCS plant material center, so they combine, harvest peely grass. They also have a'ali'i seed production plots, and what they do is just somebody has this is a'ali'i, so they just hit the tree with bat, and then somebody catches the seeds. So once you have harvested the seeds, then it's time to dry. Just one note, only use the drying aspect for orthodox seeds, so do not dry recalcitrant seeds, because if you dry them, you will kill the seed. If possible, allow the seeds to dry in the field to reduce cost. Try to dry the material to a target moisture content of about 8 to 15%. That needs to be, I guess, that's species dependent, so you have to study that or do some experimentation. If you have equipment, you can use commercial seed dryers, but be on the lookout for things that might damage the seed or maybe too high temperatures. So I would recommend drying with a high airflow and low heat levels. So when cleaning small batches, you can do hand cleaning if it's small batches. If it's large batches, then you might want to invest in machine cleaning. So try to calibrate your cleaning equipment to allow the greatest proportion of seeds. So observe the chaff that's on the other end of the cleaning equipment, if there's any small viable seeds in them, and then calibrate as needed. Then in between, if you're cleaning between seed lots, then try to thoroughly clean the equipment so that there's no mixing of seeds. Seed storage, so recalcitrant seeds, store them cool and moist, but use them immediately. Orthodox seeds, dry them to a low moisture content. So air dry and then store in low humidity conditions. You can put them in airtight foil packets. For long-term storage, you want to have a cold and dry condition for orthodox seeds. Low humidity is key, about less than 25%. 20% is ideal for storage at room temp. And then a rule of thumb in terms of seed storage, Harrington's rule of thumb, if storage temperature and relative humidity, if you add those, should be less than or equal to 100 if you want to store the seeds a year or less. Maybe during this portion of seed storage, you may want to think of an after ripening treatment if it does require one. And try to store seed populations separately and then monitor their progress or germination over time, so you have data on that, and that can help with future seed production efforts. So the take-home message, try to maximize genetic diversity so that the plants that you're putting in your restoration site will persist over time. Consider genetics in all aspects of seed production, and try to minimize the loss of genetic diversity during the seed production process. So any questions?